Ladies and gentlemen, happy Aloha Friday. We made it. It's the end of the week. Welcome to another session of Localization Explained. I'm excited. We have an amazing couple of presenters for you today. We have a huge attendance for something that is new and that we just created. So we're really excited about this, and I personally can't wait. My name is Philip Weisberg. I will be your moderator for the next hour or so. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce San Diego's own Marina Grayson Farrell. This whole thing that we're doing right now, this is her brainchild, and I'll let her explain it. But for those of you who don't know who she is, she leads localization at Pearson Education. She is the ambassador, the head ambassador for San Diego Loc Lunch, which is a meeting similar to this, where we talk about localization and network and everything along those lines. She likes to say she's a chief explainer because she explains localization within Pearson. She explains localization in situations like this, and she is a source of knowledge with 20 plus years of experience in the industry. She's been both on the LSP and the client side, so her wealth of knowledge is going to be shared with us, and we shall be extremely excited. And with that, let's get the party started. I will let Marina take it from here.
Thanks, Phil. You've been awesome. Phil is over at translation.com, Trans Perfect Family, and doing a lot of cool things over there. But in this space, we are not associated. We are a community. We're localization people, and we're a family. And we're learning from each other. And one of the biggest things I've done in my career is explaining all these mysterious things about localization. And I've invited people who are not in localization deliberately to hear this wonderful presentation and find out about this mysterious, how do we get films and video translated? And Netflix is amazing, as everybody knows. You know, Netflix is more than a content platform, streaming service. It's become a production company, and I like to think of it as the people behind Netflix that take these films and all of the things that it takes to create, putting in languages and making it culturally appropriate. Zak has been in quite a few presentations already. You may know him from his time at Lyft. And all of this time at Lyft, the challenges he's faced, the things he's done over there have led him to become on the stage at Netflix now. So I have a lot of pleasure in introducing Zak. We're going to hear about some of his role over there, how he got to where he is, and Zak.
There he is.
Here I am.
The man of the hour.
Awesome. Well, first of all, I want to say thank you so much for having me here today. Like you mentioned, it's definitely a community, and so it's important for people to share knowledge and to basically come together to try and make everyone else better and lift each other up. So, I'm certainly happy. Like you mentioned, I've done things like this before, but I'm always happy to do things like this in the future going forward. So as Marina mentioned, my name is Zak Haitkin. I am a localization project manager at Netflix. I will preface this. I'm very new there. I've been there 2 months, but I spent 6.5 years at Lyft before that. So I've got a decent amount of experience in the tech world, and I was working in a capacity in localization over there for about 2.5 years. So what I think would be really great today is I'd love to start with, I guess you could call it my origin story if we're using entertainment terms, to talk about my path from the beginning of Lyft all the way through up to Netflix, and kind of weave in the types of experiences I had as a project manager, because I wasn't just a project manager for localization. I was a project program manager for something else that I'll get into. And so I think it'll be good to share just the best practices and the way I approach that type of work. And I think it could apply not only to localization, but other programs and projects as well. So going back to 2013, which is 8 years ago, Oh boy, that is very strange to say, but that's all right. I was actually working in San Francisco. So I've been in San Francisco for the last 10 years. I grew up in LA County. And so I've been here 10 years. I was working actually as a bartender at a restaurant. Most of my experience before moving up here was in the restaurant industry. So I was working as a bartender, and a friend of mine came to me and he said, listen, there's this new company. You take these giant pink fuzzy mustaches and you put them on the front of your car, and you have an app on your smartphone, and you get requests and you take people where they want to go. You fist bump them when they get in the car, and you make $45 an hour. And I was a little bit incredulous at first. If anybody remembers those early days, it was certainly kind of a godsend, especially if you lived in an area where it was hard to get a taxi and you didn't want to spend the money on an Uber. So anyways, he got me to sign up to be a driver. And so what I would do is I would work my shift at the bar, and then I'd go out and drive. So one fateful night at the beginning of 2014, I picked up someone who was a Lyft employee. And this was very early. Lyft was really only in about half dozen markets. San Diego, actually being one of those markets, was a very early market for Lyft. And so I picked up this guy who was a support team manager. He and I had a good conversation, and he said, hey, we're hiring for our support team. Would you want to come to a recruiting event we're having? And I was a little hesitant at the time because, I wasn't really sure if the company was going to go anywhere. It was still very new. And so I decided to go to the event and ended up getting the job just as an entry-level support team manager. I'm sorry, support team associate. And so I started on the night shift, the other 9 to 5, 9 p.m. to 5 a.m., because no one else wanted to do it. And they decided that they had they were going to pay people more to work on the night shift. So I said, why not? And yeah, so that was really my first experience. I never worked at a tech company before. It was only about 200, maybe 250 employees. So it was really a chance to get to know people and get exposed to the tech industry here in the Bay Area. And so a little bit of background in terms of my language. I'm not a native Spanish speaker, but I am fluent in Spanish. I have a degree in Spanish language and international studies with an emphasis in Latin America. So immediately after joining, there was actually, I noticed that there was maybe one other person who could actually answer emails and phones in Spanish. And so that was something that was my first real exposure to trying to help people who were using Lyft in a different language. And since Spanish is what I speak, that's what I was trying to do. So I spent a year on the support team, then moved over to operations and was managing markets. And this was before there were, now there's dispersed local teams. This was very much before that. So the markets I had were Chicago, Miami, and Atlanta. And so obviously Miami being a heavily Spanish speaking market, but really any major urban area, you're going to see a lot of Spanish speaking drivers. So I was coordinating communications and trying to basically the responsibility was to put the right amount of drivers in the right place at the right time. So I would try and do that in general in terms of driver incentives, but also communications, of which I also was doing the translation into Spanish myself. So I spent a year doing that. And so neither of those roles were really owning a specific program or project, but after spending a year on operations, at the same time I signed up to be a Lyft driver, I signed up to be an Uber driver, more or less. And so there was a team being formed for competitive intelligence. And so the one person that was running it would always talk to me, say, hey, what's Uber doing? What does their app look like? Are there new product features? And eventually it came to the point where she's like, I talk to you every day. Why don't you just come join my team? So that's when I got pulled on to competitive intelligence to run the local insights program. So this was really, as Lyft was growing, we really needed more visibility into what Uber was doing in all these different markets. So I built this whole competitive intelligence network of drivers and riders to send information back to us about the product, about incentives, about promotions. And that was really my first experience in terms of running a program. And I didn't have anyone working under me, so it was more project and program management. And so what what was so important there was building the relationships, not just internally with other people, because I had a lot of people coming to me, engineering, product, marketing, even legal sometimes. If Uber was updating their terms of service or something, they wanted to know that. So I definitely spent a lot of time building relationships internally, but also building relationships with people on the ground that were able to send me information. And so when I had something, when I saw something on the news, or when someone else came to me, says, what's going on with Uber drivers in New York in terms of incentives, I had people already ready to go to give me that information. So I think that's one piece of good program management, is to really build the connections and know who you can rely on in those times. So yeah, spent 2.5 years doing that. Built the program from one market in San Francisco to over 50 markets. The team grew from 2 people to 12 people. I was managing 3 different people that were overseeing different parts of the country. But this entire time, I had really wanted to get back to language. I didn't really have much of a chance to work in what I actually didn't understand was I didn't know localization was like a thing. I know that sounds kind of weird, but I knew that there were companies that would they would have content in other languages, but I didn't really understand that was like an industry. So slowly I started to realize that's something that I wanted to move into. And Lyft for the longest time was only in English and only in the US. And so there were changes that needed to be made. When Lyft launched in Toronto, they solved the internationalization issue with being able to operate in another country, another currency, but it was still only English. So I continue to advocate for localizing, for refactoring the entire code base, more or less, to be able to support another language. Finally got onto the COO's desk, and he signed on as an executive sponsor in order to move it forward. And so for 6 months, I worked in 2 roles, competitive and on localization as a project manager, really being the type of connection with people internally. There was also a program manager and a Spanish language manager as we were building this. And so I worked to be that. I used my internal connections to really help me understand and move forward what needed to be done. And so whenever a problem came up, or when we were building our Spanish language glossary, or when I needed to tell an engineer when he's building a localization library what the proper date format is, as opposed to hard coding dates, things like that were really what I focused on as we were building the system. And then in late 2018 was when we finally launched Spanish as our first non-English language. And then from there, we moved into Canadian French. Brazilian Portuguese are supported in the Lyft app now. It wasn't easy pushing those out. And after spending about a year as a project manager, there was a shift in priorities, and they ended up moving me to program manager to run the entire program by myself. And so I had to take everything that I had learned on the project management side and now run everything, as opposed to just being the connective tissue internally. And that was I don't want to say difficult, but it was a challenging experience, because I was still fairly new to localization. I was still learning how the systems worked, what type of, not what a TMS was, but what a TMS could really do. I think that was something that I definitely had to learn really quickly. And then not just being the internal person, but also working with vendors externally in order to move things forward. Fortunately for Lyft, we had some really, really amazing vendors that we were really lucky to work with. So translation quality and our TMS was really, it wasn't too hard for me. They really made me look good on a regular basis. So yeah, so I think that's on the Lyft side. I definitely feel like that really got my feet wet and really taught me a lot about how to run a program, how to do it by myself, and at the end of last year, I was reached out to by by Netflix for a project manager role. And it was, of course, when Netflix comes calling, you definitely want to hear what they have to say. But being a program manager, moving, I don't want to say backwards to a project manager, because they really do different things, and I'll get into that in a second. But I was a little hesitant because I wanted to make sure that I was continuing to move forward. But as I went through the interview process, I really started to understand more about what the team over at Netflix was doing, and compared to what the team of me, myself, and I over at Lyft, and how we were moving forward. And that was really what drove me to make the change. Was I saw a much larger program. There were a lot more people that I could learn from and really understand how localization works at that type of level. Not to say that Lyft, I'm sure that eventually they'll expand farther than the US and Canada, but being able to move to a company that's in 30 plus languages in 100 plus countries is definitely a completely different experience that I wanted to take on. So
thanks, Zach. I was just going to ask, so fantastic segue into what is life like at Netflix, and you got onto that team as a project manager. What's different now?
Yeah, so I think, first of all, just the sheer size of the program and the sheer amount of content that needs to be localized. So there wasn't really, I mean, if you look at a company like Lyft, it's really, it's mostly app-based. There's, some web content, some messaging marketing content, but then you look at Netflix and you've got marketing, you've got legal, you've got content and product. And so that's really the way they divide things. Is there's a lot of people working on the content side, subtitles, dubbing, things like that. And then there's people working on the product experience. So web, mobile, things like that. So that was the first thing that I really noticed, was there was a split, and a necessary split, because there's just so much content coming out at all times that you have to have really clear delineation. Now, that's not to say that there's not a lot of cross functionality. I certainly work with those people, and there's a lot of teams that are working with both product and content. For example, there are language managers for certain regions that work with both content and product to make sure that they advise us on terminology, on best practices in terms of linguistic quality checks, things like that. So yeah, that was probably the first thing that I saw, was just the size of it was going to be a lot different. The other thing too, and this is probably one of my challenges coming in, was being a team of one and running the entire thing and having the autonomy to run it the way I saw fit. Now moving to a much more focused role, I felt anxious, to say the least, because I felt like I needed to know everything about everything and know everybody and do everything like I did at Lyft. But I quickly realized that I don't have to do that. I don't have to be the end all be all for everything localization, because I have a really great team to rely on, and other great teams that are also working on localization to rely on as well. So I think that's probably the biggest thing that I noticed in the change.
We've seen a little bit of Netflix at a Women in Localization event where they had this in the LA office, and they had this handout of localized, these are actually labels that I think the Globalization department was giving out, and you can see that, they do art and production and that kind of thing. Here's aroma in Korean. So it's interesting how there's so much about globalization at Netflix. So Zach, do you manage any of these projects for production, like the art, or is it just the movies only?
I'm actually on the product side. So,
Right.
And again, I want to preface this with, I am still quite new. So I think there's still a lot for me to learn, but I'm not on the content side. I have a counterpart who does the same thing on that side. But I very much focus on the mobile experience in terms of product strings and the web experience as well. And then also focusing on new members and new markets. As Netflix expands, you might have seen in the news recently, we've recently passed 200 million subscribers worldwide, which is a pretty incredible achievement. Not that I had anything to do with that, because I joined right after we hit that milestone, but on to the next one. I focus much more on the web and product experience as opposed to content.
Excellent, excellent. So the secret to your success moving up, you've been the go-to person. You make yourself available. You've been working in many different areas, and I think you got a lot of ambition and just making yourself helpful for everybody. Is there any secret to how you've moved up?
I don't know. I wouldn't necessarily call them secrets. I think they're just ways of working that I think were beneficial to me. And even going back to my experience in the food industry, particularly bartending, is being empathetic and being able to build relationships with people and hear where they're coming from, try and understand what they're trying to do and what you're trying to do, and come to not an agreement, but come to come up with a way that both of you can achieve your goals together. And then in an ideal world, both of you are come out the other side having accomplished something. And then in the future, if you need to rely on that person, you've worked with them and you've been able to have success. So I think, number one is just relationship building. And you look at my time at Lyft, I went from support to operations to competitive to localization. Like I would not have been able to do that had I not made an effort to work with people and to get on their good side and really push things forward. And so when it came time, particularly on the localization side, when it came time to fill a project manager role, and half a dozen people in that room pointed right to me and said, well, this guy's already doing the job. He's helping me with this and this and this. He's knowledgeable. He speaks another language, and let's give him a shot.
Excellent. And I think that passion that you've already had for the language has really helped in this whole endeavor. Yeah,
definitely.
So then, just out of curiosity for me, what's your favorite film that's come in? Do you listen to it in which language?
That's a good one. I watch a decent amount of movies. I probably should have mentioned this before. I grew up around the film industry. My dad actually was a director of photography in Hollywood for 35 years. He's a lot cooler than I am, I like to say. But he has the same last name as me, but his first name is Jacques, even though he's not French. He's from New York. But he showed me a lot, like he brought me on set a handful of times. I actually worked on a movie with him in Spain as well, back in like the early 2000s. But so I would say I'm watching more TV shows. So I would say, as far as a movie I just watched actually that was pretty amazing was called Mank, about Herman Mankiewicz, one of the screenwriters on Citizen Kane. And it's a new movie. I mean, it's Gary Oldman, who's incredible, but it's a newer movie, but it's shot in the style of a 1950s black and white movie. And I think it got quite a few nominations, so I would definitely recommend it. But as far as shows, La Casa de Papel, or Money Heist, that's a good example of a title localization. There is definitely one of my favorite Netflix shows that I cannot wait for the next season to come out. I don't know when it'll come out, but I hope it comes out soon. But that's probably one of my favorites in terms of Netflix movies and shows.
Oh, fantastic. I think we got a few minutes here before we do Q&A. Those questions are just stacking up.
Sure.
You're going to have people asking day-to-day kind of role. Are you in there in the TMS and getting those matches in TM? Or is that someone else?
So it is someone else. There's quite a few moving pieces of the machine, but my day to day is working with engineers. So I'm definitely more internal, much more facing internally, and then I have contacts that work with our translation vendors that help me push things through. But there's a lot of, with any tech company, there's a lot of testing that goes on. So engineers and product managers will be running different tests, like let's put this on this side, or let's show this, or let's show less information here, things like that, to try and drive engagement and improve the experience overall. So when they do these tests, of course, they need to be localized. So I work with engineers to help set up the localization quality control. So they'll finish a test, they'll check it into the code, they'll help me generate some screenshots for it. I'll send it over to my contact with the vendor, and they'll have linguists look at the actual experience. And if there's any issues that arise, whether it be linguistic, could be a mistranslation, or if they see some type of error with line breaks. One we see a lot actually with Thai script is very tall. And so sometimes if it's not coded right, it can actually run over into the next line. So that's just one example of a type of issue that can be flagged. Then I need to go back to the engineer and work with them to help get it resolved.
Oh, fantastic. And it's good to mention that translation and localization is a lot more involved than most people realize. And anybody that's on this meeting that's not in the localization sphere, we can explain at a later time what TMS, MT, TM, all that, what that all means. But that's interesting to hear from you, Zach, that what you're doing in relation. And you'd say, I think you mentioned to me before, a localization project manager sits between the strategy piece, the localization program manager, and production. Is that right?
Yeah, and actually, I was just about to bring that up because you hear localization PM a lot, but a PM has honestly three meanings to me: product manager, program manager, or project manager. So a lot of times you'll see people put a little lowercase, either a G or a J in between. But yes, so I think it's good to call out the distinction the way I see it between a program manager and the project manager. So first, talking about the program manager, they're very much more strategy and innovation. They're more of the upstream. They're more working out what kinds of tests we should do, which languages should we do this for, looking at the data and analyzing tests that have been done in the past and seeing what the results are, and then working with the product manager or the engineering team that ran that test, whether or not to actually productize it. Whereas I see the project manager is very much the person that's in the trenches. They are the ones that they're much more operationally focused. They have a deeper understanding of the tools and of the workflow. And so it's really almost like a yin and yang type relationship, because you've got program managers that are focusing on certain components like the website or the app or subtitles, and they have their counterpart, the project manager, of when work comes down, the program manager will kind of hand it off and say, hey, can you make this happen? Can you make sure everything is looking right? So I think that it's very much, as I said before, program management is more upstream, project management is more downstream, but you can't really have one without the other, unless you have one person doing both, as I was doing at Lyft for so long. But I think it's really important to see the distinction between the two roles, and to understand that in order to have a really successful program, the way Netflix is having that work divided between two different roles is really important when you have a program the size that they have.
Absolutely. There's a lot of moving parts there. And yeah, I really see that the success is everybody behind the scenes and everybody behind Netflix. All right. So in your past life, you've done a podcast in Spanish. If you were to pitch a new network show at Netflix, what would it be about? Would it be about baseball, like you did in your podcast, or what would it be?
Yeah, boy, that podcast, I can't escape it. No, it was a fun. It's still on YouTube. I probably shouldn't say that, but that's okay. Um, it was a fun experience. I had just come back from studying abroad in Mexico for 3 months and wanted to continue my Spanish skills. And since I'm not a native speaker, it's definitely, if I don't use it, I lose it. So trying to maintain that. Yeah, if I were gonna pitch a show, I really like sci-fi, actually. I wouldn't say I'm crazy into it, but I'm really liking a handful of shows, some on Netflix, some not. So yeah, I'd love to see more sports shows, but I feel like there aren't a ton of those on Netflix. So yeah, no, I'd love to see maybe like another baseball type comedy, Eastbound and Down. It's kind of an older show. I think it was on HBO with Danny McBride, and I mean that show was hilarious. So I don't know, maybe like a spin on that in a different way.
Excellent. Well, it's something to engage the global filmmakers also. All right. Well, I think we should get into the Q&A pretty soon. I've asked you some questions, but there's a ton of great questions here. Phil, you want to lead those on?